Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kamla Rampersad Silva, Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's very special panel discussion entitled Transitioning of State Boards under New Government Administration. This new panel discussion is being hosted in response to the change in government here in Trinidad and Tobago and the uncertainty faced by some directors appointed to state boards as to whether or not they should automatically submit their resignation to the new government. Jamaica and Guyana are also scheduled to go to the polls later this year. So this conversation is quite instructive for persons in these countries, and we are happy that we therefore have three very experienced panelists who will give their take, and then we will open up this conversation to our participants in the room as well. Okay. First, let me share though that we are live streaming all of today's discussion on our YouTube channel and on our social media pages. And so we say hello to everyone who has joined us via the live stream. A very special thank you to Warren Anderson, our social media support, who has done a wonderful job in helping us with the live stream. I would also like to recognize the CCGI team, Laura Sinanan, Jacqueline Deshaussé, Quantrell de Silva, and Monique Romano for their hard work. And I'm going to ask Laura to please put the link to our social media channels in the chat. We would like to ask persons to take a minute to like and follow us on social media. So we have over 200 videos on our YouTube channel, which allows you to be able to review past discussions and conferences, which adds to our understanding of issues and challenges in governance in the region here. And so let me welcome all of you, all of our participants in the virtual room especially, to today's session. Many of you are members of CCGI and you are regular attendees to our events. So we thank you for your continued support. To those of you who are joining us for the first time, here is a short history on CCGI. Established as a nonprofit membership organization in 2012, the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute currently enjoys over 300 members from a range of private and public sector organizations across the Caribbean region. We are pleased to share that these include persons from Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Barbados, Belize, St. Lucia, Guyana, the British Virgin Islands, St. Martin, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we are hoping some efforts come through this year, and we would also be able to add persons from the Dutch Caribbean to our list of members. As in previous years, we host a range of workshops and panel discussions on evolving issues in governance, as well as our signature event, Governance Week, and a two-day global conference. All of these are held online to easily facilitate persons throughout the Caribbean region. This year, our theme for Governance Week is Governance in an Age of Generative AI. And as usual, we will be joined by over 50 leaders from the Caribbean to explore this very important theme. Our opening keynote, always an international expert, this year is Dr. Fatima Abu Salem, and she's a professor at the University of Beirut in Lebanon, and she brings tremendous expertise in evolving area of artificial intelligence. We also have five very amazing speakers who will open each day of conference. We start on Monday, June 23rd, with Eldon Marks from Guyana, who would be looking at the general theme of governance and management relations. Then on Tuesday, 24th, Ricardo Allen from Jamaica would be looking at governance in the private sector. On Wednesday, June 25th, Javed Sajad from Trinidad and Tobago will be addressing the issue of AI and governance in the state sector. And on Thursday, 26 June, when we turn our focus on governance of SMEs and family-owned businesses, we are very happy to welcome Daniela Richardson Daniela is present with us today for this panel discussion, and we say a very special hello to her. Daniela is president of the Chamber of Industry and Commerce for Statia and Sabre, very small islands of the U.S. Virgin Islands, and they're part of the Dutch Caribbean. And we end Governance Week on Friday, June 27th, as we turn our attention to governance of groups and conglomerates. And our opening presenter is Patricia Rose-Seal from Barbados. We have started getting confirmations of a sponsorship for Governance Week, and we'd like to thank those sponsors. We have Massey Holdings returning as our platinum sponsor, and we are very appreciative to Massey. Also, Trident Trust from the British Virgin Islands is returning for a second time as a silver sponsor. Angostura Holdings, a very strong supporter of CCGI activities and a regular sponsor to our events, is also returning as a bronze sponsor for Governance Week this year. And we are happy to welcome for the second time G.A. Rowe and Sons from Belize, returning as a bronze sponsor for Governance Week. I'd like to share that we are currently also running our modules in corporate governance, which covers all of the fundamental principles that one should know if you are involved in serving on a board or supporting a board as an executive. So anyone who is interested in these modules, please reach out to us for details. You may still join. Module 3 begins next week, and Module 4, which looks at corporate reporting, is the following week. And we have a special 20% off for persons who register for all the modules. And you can, in fact, repeat those modules in October when we have them again. Also coming up later this month, we have a panel discussion on governance of credit unions, with our topic being the issue of risk management and governance with these credit unions. And we have 3 panelists, Fiona Reynolds, who is coming to us from the Jamaica Credit Union League, Latoya Auguste, who is the operations manager at the St. John's Credit Union in Antigua and Barbuda, and from Trinidad and Tobago, Sherry Ann Joseph, who is a consultant for credit unions with Harcourt Consulting. So please ensure that you join us for these discussions. Many of us are members of credit unions, and as we know, the credit unions are very important in the financial stability for many families in the region. We also have a workshop on financial stewardship for directors and officers who do not have a background in finance. This will be facilitated by Howard Dutton on July 23rd. And then we end our series on the role of the board with Dr. Chris Pierce from the UK, who will deliver a workshop on leading effective boards on August 7th. So I invite you to visit our website for details on these events and many others that we have already opened for registration. And if you are not yet a member, do consider joining us and actively contribute to the conversation on how we can improve leadership and governance to achieve sustainable outcomes. Persons may join as individual members, or your companies may choose to pay for bundle membership, which can cover from 6 to 12 members. And before we get into today's panel discussions, which we know is critically important today, and that's why it's important for us to have the conversation, because these are evolving practices for us in the region. We do have some very strict housekeeping rules. We would like everyone to ensure that they have their full names on their devices so we can identify who is present here with us. And this is because we are in a virtual room together. It is not a webinar. So persons can easily access and engage with the other participants. So we must ensure everyone is easily identifiable. To ensure everybody has a good experience, we also ask that you keep your microphones on mute throughout the conversation. If during the question and answer segment you wish to make a comment or ask a question, please raise your hand using the virtual icon at the bottom of your screen, and we will identify and invite you to speak. Otherwise, you can also put your question or your comment in the chat feature, and this would be brought to the attention of the panelists. Anyone who unmutes to speak, we ask that you also do mute your microphone as soon as you are done, so as to minimize any disruptive noises in your background. We have started a practice this last year that we issue certificates of participation to everyone who attends sessions, even like these panel discussions. So once you have registered for this session and you have attended the full time that we run the session, you will receive a certificate of participation from us. Okay. And finally, we will put up a survey link in the chat towards the end of today's panel discussion. We will appreciate if you take 2 minutes and give us your feedback, please. It does help us to ensure that we are meeting your expectations. And now we move to what everyone is here for, which is the conversation as we look at the transitioning of state boards under a new government. As I mentioned before, we have 3 really outstanding persons who will be joining us and sharing their experience with us. I am not going to be reading their full profiles. So Laura, I'm going to ask you if you can put the agenda in the chat, please, so everyone present will be able to see their full background. I'm just going to do a summary of their profiles so that we could get quickly to the conversation. I'm going to start with Claire Gomez-Miller, a very familiar face here with us at CCGI. Claire is a chartered certified accountant and a fellow of the United Kingdom's Association of Chartered Certified Accountants and the Institute of Chartered Accountants here in Trinidad and Tobago. She's currently the managing director of British American Insurance Company, Trinidad Limited. She's a board member of the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, of Alutech, and also of Unipet, the United Independent Petroleum Marketing Company Limited. She is an extremely active facilitator, speaker, consultant here with us at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. She provides governance training and services for persons throughout the Caribbean region in terms of training for board directors and officers. And we are extremely pleased to have her join today's panel discussion with us. As we would have mentioned just before the start today, our director from Jamaica, Camille Facey, is unable to join us today. And so instead, we are joined by Mrs. Tanisha Campbell. Tanisha, we are so appreciative of you accepting our invitation at the last minute. Tanisha Campbell currently serves as the Senior Director of the Public Bodies Governance at the Ministry of Finance and Public Service in Jamaica, where she leads the development of legislation, regulations, and policies aimed at strengthening the corporate governance framework for public bodies in Jamaica. With over 18 years of experience in governance, public administration, legal research drafting, and strategic planning, Tanisha brings a wealth of expertise to her role. She holds an MBA from the University of London and a Level 7 Diploma in Strategic Leadership and Management from the Chartered Management Institute in the UK. Additionally, she earned an advanced certificate in corporate governance from the Chartered Governance Institute in the UK and is actively pursuing the Chartered Governance Professional designation. And now we would like to introduce our director from Guyana, and that is Robbie Ramaran. Robbie is a director at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, and he has over 20 years of experience in the public and private sectors. He is passionate about corporate governance and wants to see an improvement in how organizations are led and managed by the board and top management team. He holds a master's in business administration, and his range of skills includes supply chain management, procurement, and healthcare management. Currently, he is the Chief Executive Officer of the Georgetown Public Hospital Corporation, Guyana's National Hospital. He's also a member of the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs Tenders Board and the chairman of Burns Memorial Presbyterian Church. And he has previously served on the board for many years, holding specific financial responsibilities. So as you can see, we have 3 very wonderful persons who would be bringing diverse perspectives to our discussion today. So I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us, and I would be inviting you to speak in turn for 8 to 10 minutes, giving us your take on what should be the action of directors as we have a change in administration. So Claire, we would like to begin with you. So welcome, and I hand over the virtual podium now to you.
Thank you very much, Kamla. Good afternoon to everyone. So given the shortness of time, and I do believe that the participants would be posing quite a lot of questions, especially as this area would directly impact them one way or the other. So I would look at the background of the board and the fiduciary duties of the board as it relates to the expectation and the legal requirement that they should always act in the best interests of the company. And that means whether it is a state-owned board, private board, or NGO boards, not-for-profit boards. So the fiduciary duties would include ensuring at all times that the organization continues its legitimate business with minimal disruptions of its oversight and operational activities. So in other words, one of the responsibilities of the board is to ensure the proper management of the risk of business disruption. So in doing so, any action that is taken by the board or even the individual directors must be weighed against that fiduciary duties. Now, we know historically, when there is a change of government, the fiduciary duties of the board appears to be secondary to the director's interest. And if it is that we are acting from a position of professionalism, then we would want to remove the emotions in a situation as such, and also the precedents that would have been set in the past history of a lot of our nations, where it is automatically there's a change of government and the directors so tender their resignation. So in managing that risk of disruption of the organization, you are now looking at an orderly action at all points in time. And what those actions would be will all depend. Yes, it depends on whether the board is one comprising political appointees, such as persons appointed by the political parties. So if it is that you know your instrument was one that was based on the direct appointment or selection of your appointment to a board or to an organization, and that right was given to the political party, whichever party it may be, then of course you are a political appointee, and as such, you should tender your resignation. However, if you're an appointee who was selected in accordance with the organization's governing legislation, be it under an act or company registration, and that appointment is made by the government or the state, then you're a state-appointed board, you're a state-appointed director. You are politically exposed. And I know a lot of us don't like to hear that word, being politically exposed persons, but you are a politically exposed person by virtue of your appointer. That is the government, meaning the state. Such persons ought to have been selected based on the expertise and experience as required by the formation legislation. And you will see in your act that governs your creation or your formation, there would be certain criteria as to what is the expertise that is required of each of the directors so appointed to that board. So you would expect that a properly convened board is one comprising, let's say, financial expertise, legal expertise, specific expertise coming from the technical nature of the organization, etc. And and those such persons, for you to really convene even a board meeting, you ought to have that the representation of the various expertise on the board. So that means that should any one of those experts tender the resignation immediately upon the change of government, it means that the rest of the board members who may decide to stay the course, what will happen? That board will be losing that expertise that is required to have a proper oversight and decision making for the benefit of the organization. Global corporate governance standards are also demanding that state-appointed boards be independent. They should be independent. And I'm speaking specifically now from the principles of corporate governance for state-owned organizations that has been published in 2015 by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is your OECD. Yeah? The OECD felt it was necessary to establish those principles of corporate governance for state-owned organizations, trying to enforce governments globally to adopt certain standards that allow for independent board appointments. So you ought not to have political appointees on your board. You ought to have independent appointees, notwithstanding that they may be representing the interests of various non-political parties. So like, for instance, you may have the trade union being represented on the board, the employees being represented on the board, key stakeholders being represented on the board, etc. Bearing in mind the need for the various expertise and experience to make that board a fully competent and capable board. Right? So the OECD has clearly stated that the state should let state-owned enterprise boards exercise their responsibilities and respect their independence. Yeah. So notwithstanding all of that, we still come back to the question, should directors tender or offer their resignation upon change of government? Individually, as a director, you will be acting in accordance with, again, that governing legislation that formed you, which would state that you have the right to tender your resignation at any point in time. And that resignation, in some of the act will tell you it goes straight to the minister, be the line minister, or in the state enterprises, you would see the corporation sole, who would be holding the majority shares in that organization. Right? Some legislative instrument will tell you that you have to tender your resignation to the chairman, and then the chairman will so proffer those resignations. So whatever it may be, the first thing that you need to know is what are the legislation or statutory requirements or regulatory requirements around the process for your tendering your resignation and the grounds for your tendering such resignation. In most cases, they will not state as to you're having to give a reason for tendering your resignation. But as we said before, go back again to that fiduciary duties. So I personally will not promote the instantaneous mass resignation of directors. I do not recommend that, primarily from the perspective of the fiduciary duties of those members of the board. I will not recommend that. However, if it is that you so decide that you really want to tender your resignation at that point in time, then do consider undated resignation letters. Undated resignation letters means, yes, you have tendered your resignation. However, the date can be left to the minister or the corporation sole at his convenience. It means to say that that date that will be placed for that as your resignation date will now be duly considered by all parties, especially the minister who is sitting there facing all of these 101 boards that they must find competent persons, independent persons to be placed as directors. Yes, so you're giving him or her that opportunity to So state a date of resignation for you that will meet the needs of the organization and also meet the needs of that position of trust, and that we always have to be mindful of, because sometimes we don't recognize that when directors and officers are appointed to any organization, it is a position of trust. And if there's no trust between the appointer and the appointee, it makes no difference carrying on that relationship. So we must respect that. But we must respect our fiduciary duty to ensure that the organization is not disrupted and the transition becomes more disorderly than an orderly transition. So Kamla, I think I will rest my case.
Thank you very much, Claire. And so certainly you have given us some things to think about here. You have indicated that resignation should be given in cases where it's a political appointment. And I guess it would take some determination as to what may be considered political appointments. But as you have clearly identified, where it is technical expertise or persons who are put in a position on the board as a result of the positions that they serve, and many of these exist in state enterprises, that it would be better that they remain in place to be able to ensure that continuity with the board. One thing you mentioned in terms of the undated letters of resignation, I would just want to share that the guidance from our previous chairman of CCGI, Mr. Ronnie Bisasa, who is a senior counsel, he advises against the practice of undated letters of resignations. So that is something that we should also discuss as we continue with today's panel discussion. But I know that where in Trinidad, there are so many variations in terms of what really should one do. There's a little bit more specific guidance in Jamaica. So we'd like to turn to Jamaica now, and I would like to invite Tanisha Campbell. Tanisha, as I would have shared in the introduction, actually sits on that governance unit in Jamaica that is responsible for actioning the legislation in Jamaica that really covers what should happen with appointment of directors in state enterprises. So Tanisha, we are so happy that Jamaica has made such progress. We are always happy to hear of what is happening there. And so I hand over the virtual podium to you now to hear your contribution.
Thank you, Kamla, and good afternoon to all my colleagues. It is indeed a privilege to be here, to be part of this dialogue that is being hosted by the CCGI on the topic of transitioning of state boards under new government administrations. And so I believe that this is a very timely conversation to be had, especially because it's important for the integrity and the continuity of public governance across the region, especially in the context of Jamaica, where we are in an election year and we are moving closer to that timeline in September where we will be going to the polls. This is a conversation that is necessary and important. And oftentimes when we hear the words board transitions, it is usually synonymous with a change of government, but it's not always a change of government that allows for a board to transition. In the context of Jamaica, when there is a change of government as well as a change of minister, the transition takes place. And so usually the new government would want to chart its course, and they want to lead, and they want to put their own stamp on their leadership. And so they want to choose the individuals that are assigned to lead in the various capacities, as well as when there is a change of minister, he or she wants to do the same thing. And so when there's a change of minister or a change of government, the board members are expected to immediately tender their resignation. But I will get to that in a few. But while we understand that the transition process is a part of democracy, we have to ensure that we manage it in a way that we're still upholding we're upholding integrity, institutional stability, we're preserving good governance, we're ensuring that our institutions or public institutions are still being maintained in a way that will help it to achieve its strategic objectives in the medium to long term, as well as to contribute to national development. And so it's important. And so today I want to start or ground my discussion on the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. And this is a central piece of legislation that governs the operations of our boards and the boards of public bodies. And so in the various jurisdictions across the region, we would consider state-owned entities as state-owned, public bodies as we know them in Jamaica as state-owned entities, but we do not call them state-owned entities in Jamaica. We call them public bodies. And so public bodies are government-owned companies that are formed either by statute or under the Companies Act of Jamaica. They're given they're given corporate body status in accordance with Section 28 of the Interpretation Act. Therefore, they have legal personality. What does this mean? So when they get legal personality, they have a name, they have an address, they can own assets in their name, they can sue, they can be sued, etc. And so these entities are considered to be public bodies, and they are separate from what we call MDAs. We have ministries, departments, and agencies. MDAs form a part of central government. They make up central government, but public bodies are not a part of central government. They are independent. They have their own rules. They have their own internal rules. So they have policies that are used to guide them, even though there are overarching frameworks like the PBMA Act, the Corporate Governance Framework for Public Bodies. Now, the PBMA Act was enacted in 2001, and of course, it sets out the responsibilities of public bodies, their boards, and their officers. And it really wants to ensure that our public bodies are efficiently managed and are financially prudent and are operating within the policy framework of government. Section 6 of the PBMA establishes that every public body must have a board of directors that's appointed by the portfolio minister. And the portfolio minister, of course, is empowered to act under the PBMA Act. Now, there are currently 154 public bodies in Jamaica, and they are divided up. And so depending on the operations of the particular public body, they are assigned to a ministry to support the policy direction of that ministry, and of course, the policy direction of the government and our national outcomes. And so the minister with responsibility for that particular ministry will decide on the individuals that should make up the boards of the public bodies that he or she has responsibility for. Usually, when individuals are decided or appointed by the minister, these individuals would serve at the pleasure of that minister, not necessarily for the good of the nation, etc. They serve because usually there is an affiliation. There are certain things, like it's a political reward system. And so we realized that that system was a little bit problematic. And so there were many things that we had to consider as technocrats and as individuals who saw the need for change to happen. And so we looked at continuity versus change. So when there is a change of government, of course, we understand the need for the government to chart its own course and to ensure that it has its imprint on leadership. But of course, we still want to ensure that we're upholding the principles of good governance in our public bodies. We want to maintain the strategic direction that has been carved out by the previous board. And we want to ensure that everything that is done by these directors is for the best interest of the company that will redound to the good of the nation. right? And so those are some of the things that we had to look at. We had to also look at meritocracy versus political patronage. Are board appointments driven by competence, sector knowledge, or alignment to national goals? Or are they seen as an extension of a political reward system? So these are the things that we had to just pull apart and see whether or not we were getting the best results from these individuals who were appointed to the boards. And of course, we looked at board accountability. We believe that the board is the head of the public body, of course, and so they have a responsibility to be accountable for the performance of that entity. When there's high turnover because there's a change of minister, there's a change of government, we still have to hold them accountable. Is this fair? Is this fair? And can we really hold them accountable for just being in position for 2 years or a year, a few months? Is it fair to the individual? And is it fair to the company that they're serving? And so a decision was made to streamline the process of directorship and decision-making in appointing directors. And so the nomination, selection, and appointment to boards was developed, and it was approved in 2021, right? And so this piece of legislation ensures that every single director that is appointed to a particular board fits the competencies that are required for that board. Of course, we're saying to the political directorate, you can choose your friends, you can choose your affiliates, but what you must do is ensure that in choosing those individuals, that they are sufficiently competent to perform the role that is expected of them while they serve on a particular board. And so we have what is called the database of prospective directors, and every individual in Jamaica who is desirous of sitting on a board must make an application to the financial secretary and must be selected from this database. Now, when there's a change of government in Jamaica or a change of minister, all the directors are expected to tender their resignation, whether you are an ex officio board member, and an ex officio board member is an individual who is joined to the board based on the position that they hold. So a lot of the ex officio positions are written somewhere in statute or in some sort of document that would provide guidance for the makeup of a particular board. Those individuals, along with the regular appointed board members, must tender their resignation. But we also tell our board members, though you have tendered your resignation, you do not just walk away from your position as a board member. We ask that you wait at least 60 days for the new government, the new minister, to make an appointment. Usually it would take longer than 60 days prior to the establishment of the database of prospective directors, because a lot of the times it's difficult to find the suitable individuals to sit on these boards. And sometimes it will take up even 6 months. We've seen boards taking up to a year for appointments to be made. But with the establishment of the database of prospective directors, we have a ready pool of candidates that are waiting. And so the appointing authorities, who are usually the ministers or the governor general, can pull from this database and find suitable individuals. And so that is what we have been doing. We have what is called the board transition guidelines. So even though individuals have resigned, they're still expected to act until a new board has been appointed by the minister. And so there are things that you can do during the transition phase. So you can't make new appointments. So you can't appoint a CEO during this period. You must undertake a current performance appraisal of the CEO, so that the new board that is appointed will understand where the CEO stands in terms of his or her performance and competencies. You can't enter into any new or major contracts or undertakings, etc. Of course, you must prepare a status report for the incoming board and submit that to the permanent secretary or the financial secretary. And of course, you must provide a report that will include all the legal issues that the company is faced with, any unresolved matters, various accounts and their signatories. You have to sort that out before the new board is appointed. Any current projects that you're undertaking, you must give a fulsome report so that the new board can understand where you are in the process and how far you've gotten from the place of strategic development to the time that you had tendered your resignation. I'm not sure, I think I'm out of time. So Kamla, hand over to you. And if there are questions, they may be fielded as soon as it's time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanisha. This was an incredible contribution, really excellent because it addresses a lot of concerns that boards in Trinidad have. So, for instance, persons who would have read the article in the Guardian newspaper today, they would have seen that our chairman, Nigel Romano, also suggested some of what you have outlined here, including a status report. So there's a proper handover from one board to the other. But there are some areas that we'd want to chat with you a little bit more later on to clarify for us. So thank you. At this point, we'd like to turn to Guyana. And one of my favorite persons, I'm so happy he serves the board of CCGI as one of our directors. Robbie Ramaran is someone who has had tremendous experience with changes in government as well. So he understands the implications of many of these. So we see, Robbie, that Tanisha is saying, although there is legislation that speaks to the change of directors, what I had not realized before, but she has outlined now, is that when there is a change in government, there is a resignation that is expected of all board members. So let's hear from you in terms of your perspective for Guyana.
Thank you, Cams, and good afternoon, everyone. Small state like us, it can be very challenging, and sometimes it's very difficult to say who is independent and who's not. In Guyana, there's a population around 750,000. So lots of our Caribbean countries are islands, actually are just about 200, 300 population, Jamaica and Trinidad in a million. But I want to commend Jamaica for the legislations that they have enacted that somewhat guide this process and also hold individuals accountable. And while I was going to speak about it in my presentation, I think Tanisha has done a fantastic job of highlighting its legislations. So I wouldn't waste much time on that. Also in Curacao, most of us know that if there is a vacant, if there is a board to be appointed, what they would do is place an advert in the newspaper or any form of media that they choose, and they will ask individuals to actually apply rather than these people are just handpicked and appointed. So when you looked at the Curacao legislation and the Jamaican, it can really gives you a somewhat perfect framework that many other states can adopt. But I like to focus a little bit on the importance of transition of new boards when a government is changed. And it's very important for its stability and continuity and effectiveness of its organizations. And it's important a lot in ensuring that stability. It's because of lessons learned for the current board. It has to do with institutional knowledge as well. And also it is important that there is a balance in ongoing projects and commitment and in that process of transitions. And we must ensure that there are strategies that really focus on as well on adjusting to new leadership, because oftentimes we tend to get this mixed up and with our own perception and our about what things should be or what it not should be or what is coming our way, rather than to have frameworks in place to help us to guide. So it's a lot to do with how we manage the continuity versus that reform or that expected reform from a new administrations. And governance and policy alignment. New administrations will have new priorities. The existing board will have new mandate. And I think that some of our focus is to ensure that there are framework on how we can manage transition smoothly. And also how we can manage or address any conflict that can arise from legacy board policies and new government directions. So these are some of the things we need to be cognizant about. And importantly, I know for in Guyana, a lot of time miscommunication or lack of communication can be very chaotic. So there should be a role, there should be a stakeholders engagement to build that public trust, to manage any sort of expectations amongst employees. They may be investors. So there needs to be strategies to maintain that confidence and confidence in its leadership as well. Transparency and ethics is very important. And we can mitigate most of the challenges on conflicts that we can have if we have a very transparent process of selecting board members. We can. It can safeguard us from political interference in board operation. And I mentioned about the Curacao model of how individuals are applied and they actually go through an interview process as if you are applying for a job, for a full-time job. I mean, some boards are full-time, but there is a process. In Jamaica, I know you had to have some sort of training in corporate governance before you can even be accepted to be sitting on a board. And oftentimes we have people who sits on board and clearly don't understand their responsibility. I have had many battles fighting in several boards that I sit on about the board's roles and responsibilities as compared to day-to-day operations and boards focus on ensuring conformance and compliances and policy direction, etc. So I think fundamentally, if that a proper systems, frameworks, and legislations are in place to select members in a transparent manner, can mitigate a lot of the conflicts that can arise in a transition of a new board. And that has to do a lot with establishing ethical standard for decisions making in the appointment of the boards as well. It helps us to manage political pressure, loyalty, and versus independence. Now, it is very important and this is something I find we don't do much in the Caribbean, is succession planning, in capacity building, in leadership development. Because the tendencies in our region is that majority of our boards are political appointments. and also representative from various agencies, which are more or less political appointment as well, because it's the ministers that makes these decisions, other than the unions. And in my case, in the hospital, we have the nursing body and the medical bodies that appoints representative. But oftentimes you find that the people who come on board, let me give you in a context of the hospital here. Sometimes you have a representative from the union. We have a representative from the nursing association and a medical associations, which is the doctors. And oftentimes these folks are not have any managerial skills. They have they were never exposed to any governance training, and they come to the board and don't understand that roles and responsibility. And that by itself we can have an effective board, because participating in conversations and making decisions, it's gonna steer some way where we don't want it to go. And there's an experience I have had. So it's fundamental as well to implement structures, program, orientation program to accelerate that adoptions of new board members. And importantly, encourage diversity and inclusion in board's appointment. And diversity in board's appointment should be, you look in the context of the organizations and what are the skill sets that are needed, and choose people from the various organizations or with the relevant skills and experience to sit on the board. And also it must be diverse in age, ethnicity, gender. I have sits on board that is dominated by male, and the conversations will be one at the same time over and over, and that's why diversity is really important. And coming after my two colleagues before me, I don't want to regurgitate what they are saying, but one important thing that I believe should be in every board charter or its bylaws is there should be a clause of staggering board members. So there is that continuity, because oftentimes we find that when a board expired, is either the new board, the entire board is renewed, or I have had experience where it took an entire year not to necessarily appoint a board after a transition, but renewing a board. So what should happen, and it's either you get your new board, you get a completely new board, or they renew the existing board, and maybe one or two changes. But there must be a framework that and provisions to say that directors must be staggered to continue for the continuity, and also for change management. So with all my colleagues have said, and a little bit, I think we all on the same but importantly, in all the contexts, staggering of directors, having proper legislation, process of selecting board members is important. And once we can get those right, and the thing is, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are enough legislations that are out there, Curacao, Jamaica, and many others. Even in the UK, I've been reading one of their transition papers recently, and even there are many frameworks that are there that can help us to strengthen once there is that will or political will. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, Robbie. I think you have raised a lot of key points in terms of the composition of the board as well, and continuity in terms of ensuring that succession planning and, this idea you just raised of staggering. I want to invite our other panelists back into the virtual room now. So, Quantrell, yes, let's have them in. So as I summarize quickly, we are looking at, this transition when there's a new government. And what is very clear is that there will be resignations, and there ought to be resignations, right? Because the new administration is coming in with a new mandate. And therefore, they would want to ensure that their policies for which they've been voted into office is what is now followed. And that mandate, of course, is delivered most times through the state enterprises. So what we have seen is what Tanisha shared. There is a framework that covers how this is done. This framework doesn't exist either here in Trinidad and Tobago or Guyana. So for quite a bit of time, there are directors who are uncertain what to do, and even the management of these state boards themselves in a contrast of what to expect will go next. So it's nice when there is a system that tells you resign, because it is what the Westminster system was developed by. It's the winner takes all, and therefore you now have the resources of the state to deliver on your mandate. The process for doing so, however, to ensure that good governance continues. And these were some of the things that Claire mentioned in terms of the practice. How do you submit that resignation? So Tanisha mentioned when it happens in Jamaica, you resign, but you remain in office for a 60-day period, given the new minister time to be able to understand his new ministry, to understand the state enterprises under his purview, and therefore pick from a pool of persons who will now support his mandate and want to deliver on his objectives. It would be great if we had a similar system, but there be no regulation. I guess there's nothing preventing a director from sitting on a state board, resignation in hand. What was recommended, as a matter of fact, by Ronnie Bisasa from CCGI is that the chairman of the state board write to the new line minister and offer the resignation of the board, those members who have tendered their resignation through him, and allow the line minister then to take the next action, whether it is to say, you may wait until you are told otherwise, or accept all the resignation with intention that the entire board be replaced. One of the key issues that did come though was, what about the interests of the nation? Because you would find at times that when these appointments are made, and we have seen this, it's political affiliation, it is political patronage, it is you supported me and this is my reward to you to now hold a position of prestige as a board member of a state enterprise. Ensuring that those persons are people who understand their fiduciary duty to look after the interests of the organization and to deliver on those objectives is something that requires a great amount of discussion, because we have seen happen in Trinidad and Tobago that when an administration changes, major projects come to a halt. And when those projects come to a halt, it's not in the best interest of the nation, because a lot of wastage would have taken place in terms of those projects, haven't had millions of dollars spent. So I want to come on a very ticklish issue for us to explore a little bit. And Robbie touched on it a little bit. And this is the issue of independence of directors. How do you demonstrate what Robbie says is important, that ethical behavior that is expected of directors, that demonstrates that you can be trusted to carry out this mandate that is given to you by the new government, but you're doing so in the interest of the organization, in the interest of nation building as well. He pointed out specifically for Guyana is a little bit more challenging because, and this was something one of their ministers told me recently during a trip to Guyana. He said, talking about independent directors in Guyana is really a joke, because everybody knows everybody. everybody's related in some way to everyone else. And therefore, what are you looking for when you are thinking of independence when it comes to state enterprises? So Claire, I don't know if you want to start with this, because we do have, for example, and I will just share this as an example. It was something I mentioned in a previous interview. Anthony Smart, who is the chairman of First Citizens Bank, has been a very politically active individual. He was the Attorney General under the administration of the National Alliance for Reconstruction, the 1986 government. Yet Anthony Smart was selected as chairman of First Citizens Bank under different administrations. So does that demonstrate that someone can have a political affiliation but yet still have an independence of mind when it comes to your duty as a director on a state board?
So everyone will have their political affiliation, and political affiliation, as you saw with our regime recently there, and they switch between parties. So the level of political affiliation will always be there. And that is why we said before, there's a difference between political appointee versus politically exposed person. So that risk will always remain with you once it is that you're appointed by any state, right? What we expect here, and what the OECD with the G20 nations, which are the largest nations of the world, and where it is that the principles that they are establishing, they are enforcing it through the World Bank. So even our 4 nations, small as we are, if we need assistance from the World Bank, we have to demonstrate that we are going to follow the principles of OECD. So we have to rest it there. Now, that means the level of independence on any board at all. You go back again to your fiduciary duties. Otherwise, you ought not to be appointed. You have to be ethical. You have to be objective, and you have to have that independence of mind. Yes? So that when you swear to accept that appointment, you are no longer seeking the interest of your political party, your affiliated party, your friends, whoever they may be. Yes? You are swearing allegiance to the organization. Because remember what we said is best interest of the organization. Now, the best interest of the organization may not be the best interest of the entire country. So if for instance, let's say, look at National Gas Company. Yeah, their mandate is not for health. So the best interest is not for them to use their profits to support the health sector, because that is not a mandate. However, the government must seek the interests of everyone, including the unwell persons within the nation. So we have to be very careful as to when we say, where is your affiliation? It has to be to the organization. Now you're looking at orderly change, yeah, that supports continuity during that transition period. And as Tanisha said, Jamaica says, you don't abandon your position. You don't send a dated resignation that says effective as of today. I am resigning, and you walk. So where is the orderly change? Of course, we must expect that the new government will want to have the persons on that board, however they may want to select them, yes, in the best interest of the organization. All we are saying here is allow them that opportunity to have an orderly transition, which means you may tender your resignation, but leave the date open. Leave it so that the minister could put it, he could put it the same date that you received it. That's okay. He could put it 6 months down the road. That's all right. He can leave it on his desk until he decides who are the replacement directors, Yes, and now the date of appointment of the new directors will be the date of your resignation. And that is all right.
But
All we're saying
I
here is,
do want to interject there and to caution, because I'm not sure if it's legally acceptable practice to have
it
an
is
undated resignation. And
legally, a lot of lawyers look at what is legal and what is not legal. You have a lot of transaction matters, etc., that takes place on a day-to-day basis that the law does not, that the law is very silent on. Okay, if the law prohibits it, then I will say it is illegal. So I will have to be shown the legislation that says it is illegal to tender or offer an undated resignation. And until I see that in black and white, guess what? My first recommendation to all directors, you wish to send in your resignation, please just send it undated. Leave it, let the minister decide what is the date that he wants to have your directorship terminated. That's all that I'm saying.
yes,
Show me
agreed.
the law and I will abide.
Yes, accept that, Claire. Now, there is a question in the chat from Charlene to you, Tanisha, and I just want to ask it very quickly. So she said if a board term is 2 or 3 years and a person is appointed to the board in an election year, would the term expire automatically if everyone resigns?
Okay. I did try to answer that, but I'm not sure if it wasn't being reflected. So the truth is that if it is that the election is called before the expiration of the board, then of course you have to wait until to see whether a new government is going to be formed, or if it's the same administration, if a new minister will be named. That is the only way you will tender resignation, if there's a new government or a new minister. If the administration remains the same and the prime minister decides that he will not make a change to, for example, the minister of finance, and the minister decides that he will keep the board members as they are, and she doesn't want to disrupt anything, then it will remain. Only when there is a change that the resignation is necessary.
Right.
I don't know if I answered the question.
Yes. And may I make a statement there? Because in a real life situation, for instance, my situation on the Revenue Authority Board, right? My 3-year period ends 31st of May, which is next few days, right? Now, making sure that the incoming minister is aware of that fact, yes? So if there's any change to that appointment, it has to be made before the 31st. Because after the 31st, I will no longer be a director. So we must understand it from that perspective.
And it's the same in Jamaica.
Depends. Yes.
Yeah, it's the same in Jamaica. So when a board expires, you have no legal
That's right.
authority to continue to act. However, if it is that you tendered your resignation before the expiration date, that is when we ask that you remain. But it really means that you really don't have any legal authority to be acting, you know. It's just a matter of goodwill. It's really just goodwill. So either way, you really do not have authority to be acting, because you've resigned, or 2, the board has expired. So you really is no longer a director on the board.
So at this point, Tanisha, the process is supposed to be that you are gathering information, you are preparing that status report, you are in essence looking to do a handover. Even if that handover were to mean that the line minister, and I'm saying line minister in this case, but we'll discuss this as well, even if it were to mean that you are reappointed on a new board under that. Okay, good. So I'm hoping that everyone gets that you know, you remain, but you don't remain as though you were director with effect with all of the responsibilities and the resources of the organization to keep moving. It is that you are providing your oversight duties, but you're also preparing your status reports to hand over. There's a question in the chat from Ria Rajkumar, and Ria is asking, can someone clarify the current process employed, if any, to appoint board members. And I think Ria is asking that with respect to Trinidad and Tobago, because of course we saw that in Jamaica, you submit your application if you would wish to serve to a board to get on that database. And I like Ria's question for the simple reason that there seems to be different opinions as to who really is responsible for appointment of state directors. Now, generally it is accepted that it's cabinet that does these appointments. But we have seen legislation that speaks to the line minister appointing. So I would appreciate, Claire, since you are here for Trinidad and Tobago, what would you say is the process employed to appoint new board members for state enterprises?
Okay, I do believe in some appointments it will require cabinet, because sometimes you would see the president having to do that final appointment, but the resignation will be sent to the line minister or corporation sole. Or so you, as I said before, you have to go back to your governing legislation for your organization. You have to do that, right? Whether it is that the director is independent or like for instance, SMART, or whether it is that they are selected from amongst their political parties, I think here is where everyone is trying to get to that level of independent directors, so that even though the party selects you, you end up there. You still have to have that independence of mind. I think the question here is the process that is being used. Where it is that we don't have the legislation that Jamaica has, it means to say that you are now pulling from your technocrats within the country, and those technocrats will be known either from within the civil service, coming through like past permanent secretaries, leaders or board directors within state-owned enterprises, yes, and you may have them coming from professional bodies, because remember what you're having here, even from the private sector, because what you're trying to do is to pull the leaders within the sectors that you really want to have that representation on that board. So if it is that you're pulling from, let's say, you need to have a financial expert, you may find the appointer going to the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Trinidad and asking for a list of certified accountants, etc. and whatnot. Same thing with actuaries, same thing with the attorneys, etc. So they are looking for those types of person. We don't have a data bank like what or a database what Jamaica has. Yes, and I believe it would be good if it is we have that type of database with persons who are pre-qualified or pre-screened, so that in a situation like this, it's easier for the incoming government to quickly select the persons and so appoint. Furthermore, they could have selected even before before that election date. To be truthful, because if that database exists, it means some pre-screening, some pre-selection could have already taken place to minimize the transition period.
Yes, and I'm sure that is, in fact, the reality of what happens, Claire, that while they're on the political hustings, you would have a lot of these persons who know that they're going to hold ministries, if it is that they do win the election, that they're looking at who are the potential persons they would want to serve on state boards in order to get the outcomes that they want. So just to say to Ria again a little bit, there's no one set process that someone can follow. If you are interested, it is that who comes to the eye of the minister in different ways, whether you are on the political hustings with them, whether you are qualified persons and can be identified through one of the professional organizations, as Claire mentioned earlier. And I'm happy that Mohini's question is next, because it's very directly related to when you do have new persons serving on state boards. She's saying, besides training, what would the panelists recommend be done for board members to understand their role and responsibilities? So for instance, when they don't understand their role and want to get involved in management, how should that be handled? Robbie, let's go to you, because we've had you silent for a little while. Then I'll come to Tanisha, because I knew she was about to share her point of view. Robbie, how should it be handled when you have new directors who don't understand their responsibilities?
I actually mentioned a bit of this in my presentation. about succession planning and about onboarding. So there must be a proper training. As let's say, let me go back a little bit and compare this to Jamaica. In Jamaica, you have to have somewhat training before you can even be considered. In the case where there is no training, and I give the example of the hospital that I work, where there are nurses and doctors who will represent their various associations and even the union who will and enter on the board, and they themselves lacks that skill set. So I mentioned about capacity building, leadership development, and its importance of equipping a new board member with the knowledge and skill necessary. And this is what you do, is to implement structured orientation program to accelerate adoptions, and encourage its diversity in its decisions making.
Thanks, Robbie. And so let's go to Tanisha now. But Tanisha, as you give your take, I also want you to address the comment from Sindel Macham Jairam. And just letting Umat know that I noticed his hand, but let's just take this point first, which is, she said, can we discuss the reaction of employees in state entities on every level on a change in government and the role of the board? So there you have it. How do new directors get trained, and then, you know, the reaction of employees in these state enterprises?
Okay. As Robbie said earlier, induction, proper orientation and induction exercise is critical to the development or just understanding and appreciation for every director. It's because an induction exercise is supposed to be something that is really detailed. And so you would meet with the departmental heads, you'll get board minutes, the last 6 minutes up to a year, you get the financials, you understand the operations of the company, so you know what is expected of you. And of course, you're brought to the board because of your expertise and the competencies that you hold. And so you can understand how it is that you can fit into this company and help it to drive its mandate. We're also, in terms, separating apart from training, a board manual is also important. You must have a board charter. So the board charter sets the expectations and the operations of the board. You know what is expected of you as a director. You know how resolutions are made. You know when meetings are called, how it is that you do a round robin. Can you do make a resolution via email, etc. All of those things are supposed to be set out in the manual, so you understand the expectations and the responsibilities of board members when there is a comprehensive board charter. Also, I like to talk about peer mentorship. So all the directors can definitely mentor the newer ones, because especially in Jamaica, we call on youth leadership. It is not mandatory, but it's desirable. And we want young people to lead and to be on our boards. When we have inexperienced directors, we like to pair them with older directors that can guide them. And so that is also very important. We also want to do regular evaluations. And as part of the NSAB regulations, and there is a requirement that at least 1/3 or 30% of the board be retained for continuity purpose. So that is achieved by looking at the board evaluation to see the directors that were doing well, the directors that showed up for meetings. And so when those directors are assessed and evaluation is done, you can definitely see what directors excelled and what directors need to work on certain things. And also, important to understanding your role is the leadership of the board. If you have a wishy-washy chairman, then you won't understand what is expected of you as a board member. Sometimes there are individual directors on the board who have dominant personalities. It is the chairman that is expected to control those directors and to ensure that every director's voice is accounted for in the decision-making processes. And so when you have a great leader, you understand what the expectations are. You understand that you are there to provide constructive challenge to hold management to account. And so when you understand the leadership of the chairman, then I think that you will become more wholesome as you go from one day to the next as a director. So those are some of the things that you can do outside of training to understand your role as a director. Now to the question, can we discuss on direction of employees in state? The truth is that the board is responsible for just ensuring that there's not mayhem, that anxieties and the fears, they help to calm the fears of the individuals, because sometimes there is mass, what would you call it? No, I don't want to say termination, but individuals are shifted from their positions when there's a change of government, and a lot of people become anxious when this is done. You know, when there's a change, they don't know what to expect. And so when the board comes, the board is really to calm those anxieties, to calm the fears, and to ensure that the individuals understand fiduciary duty, that they're there to lead, that they're there to hold management to account. And once you do what is expected of you, you will maintain your job, you know. And so, I mean, anxiety is expected, but then I think it depends really on the mandate of the government, because sometimes governments will come in and they want to change up everything. There's really nothing that you can do, because board members are given directives and they're expected to ensure that those directives are carried out. So you really just have to wait and see what happens, and just do what you are expected to do as an employee.
That's an excellent contribution, Tanisha. Yes, thank you very much. So now I'd like to go to Umar. I know he had his hand raised for a bit. Umar, so yes, just let's hear your question or comment.
Good afternoon, all. Very interesting and fertile conversation thus far. I want to zoom in on the theme, transition, because I think embodied in that whole transition thing are really a basket of sub-issues. And in the first instance, I want to tie it into Claire's initial point about fiduciary duty, i.e. acting in terms of what is right, as opposed to acting in concert with your political affiliation. Now, the conversation thus far has essentially focused, I mean, I know Jamaica would have shared in terms of their legislation, and we would have been discussing, you know, board of directors in terms of resignations and data resignation. But I want to go a little step back, and I want to apportion some responsibility and accountability for transitioning to prospective governments that are entering office. To my mind, you're preparing as the opposition. Of course, it assumes an opposition who has entered into an election or gone through an election and has been elected. And in the same manner that prior to the election, you would have already had an idea of who your cabinet ministers would be. You know, concomitant with that should be the start of some sort of interim consideration as to who, if not the entire boards, but at least, you know, your top boards or as many boards as possible, who you would have as chair, right? Now, notwithstanding the expectation of resignations of political appointees, that mechanism that has to balance transition with fiduciary authority, fiduciary duty, and also allow for political discretion by the incumbent government, which they have that right too. So maybe legislatively or otherwise, statutorily, perhaps there can be a mechanism designed where, listen, in the event of a change of government, the new government has 3 months, I'm just choosing a time frame here, in which to identify, as far as is reasonable or practical, the filling of vacancies for boards. In that transitionary period, the existing directors can then work towards signing or finalizing what have. Now, there should be some caveats though, you know, because you don't want in that, you know, intervening.
I'm glad you said that, Umar,
Yes.
because in fact, that is
Yes, with some caveats. Let me make that very clear.
Function as though you asked
Right.
a director under the previous administration.
Right. So that's
Like
what so
idea
I
of 3
omitted.
months.
I
Yeah.
omitted to put that in with some caveats. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it ensures, among other things, that you get the opportunity, because one of the things that happens, or rather does not happen, is coming out of the election, the current or incumbent board evaporates, a new board comes in, and the only thing really tying them into what the strategic progress of the organization is in terms of access is really the last board minutes. Yep. And if we talk about fiduciary duty, and we talk about wastage, and we talk about, you know, okay, a new board just comes in, and even without regard to reviewing, all right, let's take a look at what the organization has been doing under the last board, and you just dispense with that and just start from zero.
Thanks
You know,
so much.
that in my view, you know, it requires some attention.
Yeah, so you're speaking to the preparation of status reports as well. So there's a proper
Yes.
handover. You
Right.
know, because absolutely, one should expect there's a change and be prepared for that change.
Exactly.
And yeah, at this point, your preparation is to leave the board.
Correct. Now, secondly, so you have instances where you can have changes, line ministry changes that might come after an election, and where you can have now a shift in what I'm calling the intra-political appointee designations. So I am appointed as chair under one line minister because of my affiliation, etc., etc. There's an election. We happen to retain government, but my agency is now placed in a cabinet reshuffle under another agency under a different minister. And at the end of the day, this is all within a political sphere, political context of allegiances, perceived or otherwise. Yeah. So that is in terms of, you know, same government, but you have different minister, you have different personal allegiances. Yeah. How is that addressed? And thirdly, and I think what is really the heart of why maybe part of this timely session we're having here, you know, in Trinidad, we had that calypso by Ronnie McIntosh a couple of years ago, How It Go Look. So here it is. We talk about in the conversation thus far about persons who are fit for office, who are qualified, who may have certain key qualifications and attributes that are either required by statute or are required to support strategically the organization. And that person is there, fiduciary minded, you know, focused on and not politically minded. But how it go look if 2 days ago I was chair of this particular state enterprise, having been appointed on the basis of capability, qualifications, competency. And now I continue in good faith, in service to the country, in service to the organization, to express an interest to want to serve in the same capacity, albeit under a different government. How it go look. And I think a lot of directors, yeah, indeed, fellow colleague directors who have gone through this, including myself, within the last how much of a day since the election. That's a standing thing. And then people are there telling you, you know what? Let me resign. And this is actually what they're saying, yeah? Let me resign before they fire me.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is accepted, Umar. That's what we have
You know?
discussed so far, that it is right to resign. It is
Yeah.
expected to resign
Yeah.
because you don't want to fetter the new government. And if it is that the way in which you have delivered your duty as a director is something that has impressed the new administration that you have value to add, then we have seen examples where persons are either retained in the same organization as we have seen with Anthony Smart, with First Citizen Bank, or also we have seen in other instances where, as Claire mentioned, persons have changed their allegiance and they get appointed to different ministries. I think the bottom line is when there's a transition of governments, there is an expectation that the policies that that government would have gotten their mandate on by the electorate is what should be given the priority for delivery. And therefore, it is up to the new government to choose who are the persons that they think will deliver on that mandate. And those persons, once elected, now have the fiduciary duty, which everyone on this panel has been very clear to speak to, and that duty of understanding corporate governance, understanding your role to the organization and the national interest. So thanks so much, Umat. I think there was another hand up. Let me just see. Was it? Yeah, Sandal, sorry. Go ahead, Sandal. Is that a question that you have? We're just half hour again into the end of here. So
It's not really a question. I had a question on the behavior of employees within the organization. I should have put a little more context in my in the chat, but it's really where there is a board currently within my organization, and it's under the old government, and there is a sense of I don't have to carry out any directive from the current board, which in my view, I think it's hindering the fiduciary duty of the board. So I think there needs to be some concessions made by management, especially high-level management, where boards are given directives. And I would have to say it's a non-contentious board. You all spoke about political and independent board, but it's really a non-contentious board where it's not like the NP or the Heritage or those boards where the media and the spotlight is on them so much. But I think for the organization to run smoothly, management should show, okay, we have a board in place, and from a governance perspective, we should continue carrying out the directive of the board until the ministry or the minister, our line minister, says otherwise. So
thank you, Claire. I would like you to take that one if it's okay. What should be the response of management as they too go through this transition?
Until the mandate is changed, you have to continue with the approved mandate. I think we need to understand that when we speak of government, when we speak of state, there is a process that they go through, cabinet goes through, yes, in incurring costs, in determining what are the mandates that are going to be assigned to each of the entities. So it is not that it's a political party that comes in and set that mandate. There is a government process that takes place, right? So for instance, right now, the repeal of the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Act, yes, you saw it. It will be coming through the political party, fine. But when it gets into the ambit of the government, you have a legal process, a due process that must take place. Fortunately or unfortunately, they've got the majority, and as such, it requires majority vote. So you know 100% it is going to be passed. But it will be proclaimed. Yes, and as such, we need to look at it from that perspective. So the management and the board itself must understand that until that mandate is changed, whatever was approved by the government, by the state before, is what they have to continue with. Fortunately for Jamaica, that transition period is nicely written in law that says you cannot do this, you ought not to do that. But where it is that you also have emergency situations, where it is that for the purpose of business continuity, like what I saw with the National Gas Company, right? Those plants don't wait for the next government to decide when to bring a board or when to change its mandate. If you need to replace a part in that plant, yes, and it costs $10 million, guess what? Somebody has to approve it. So your process, etc., must be there, and you must be able to function. As we said before, until your mandate has changed, your purpose has changed, the state directives change where your organization is concerned. That's the only time that you start changing. And if it is, we are saying independence of mind, however you may be appointed. Yes, from the moment you swear that oath and you take allegiance, you pledge allegiance to that organization, you should be, as I always say, you should be facing the courts if it is that you're failing in your duties. That's all I'm saying. So we need to be able to ensure that the directors and the officers of the organization manage that transition period and manage it within the ambit of their mandate.
Thank you, Claire. So if I may just say that in different words again, because it's a very important point, when decisions have been made by the board that has already been passed to management team, the officers of the organization have a duty to carry this out. It is when there's the transition period, and so the board already knows that there's a new government in place, no new mandate should be given, no new projects, no new decisions that is now going to fetter the new government, because that would not be considered your fiduciary duty. Okay, and therefore management needs to understand what it already has approval and must continue with, and also consider business continuity, as Claire says. You know, this is not a time for you to say, okay, I could take a rest now and wait until there's a new board, I don't have to act. No, you have a duty and function that you must carry out to ensure the well-being of that organization. Okay, Mohini, I see your hand, so I want to come to you now.
Okay, I was just wanting to get in on the narrative about the transition. What does management do during that period when you still have an active board, because the life of the board has not expired, it's just the government change. And we have all just discussed what, we still should be carrying out management, that is, should still carry out the decisions of the board, but that thin line between whether the current board that is still in effect because of the life and not because of a changing government, life still exists, makes decisions, and this is where I think sometimes I have the issue, is when that board makes decisions, how does management or should management carry out decisions that board makes whilst in that transition period? And I think that's where, for me, that's where usually my gray lines, the gray areas are.
Which is ultra-virus of the requirement during that transition period, Mohini?
Pardon?
Where it is that the directives that are coming from the board are ultra-virus, what they ought to be, or what they ought not to be doing under that transition period.
Yes. No, but that is it. It is not clearly spelled out, because the life is, let us say, okay, let's say we have elections in June. The life of the board is from January to December. So in June, we have a change of government. It still says that the life of the board is still in effect. Nobody resigns, nothing happens. So but in June, we have a meeting, and there are decisions that are taken that management now is expected to act on. But should management act on the decision because they know that more likely than not in July there is going to be a change in the board makeup, because there has been a change in government? And that's in Guyana. I don't know if Robbie's going to back me up on this, but sometimes that's a transition period that we have, and we have issues with.
Risk management kicks in there, Mohini, from the perspective that I've seen experience, where it is that on the eve of the election, agreements have been entered into that bind the organization. And as such, I would always want to frown that you're coming up into that general election date, right? Unless it is that you can justify why that sense of urgency is there, then you ought not to bind the organization into these types of projects, etc., and whatnot. And I think Kamla alluded to that before.
Absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, yes, it's business continuity, but risk management kicks in. Because you ought not to bind the organization to the extent that when the new regime comes in, that they are forced to follow a mandate and especially when it is that that mandate would have been changed. Because remember, the manifestos, all of those things, the pronouncements throughout the election campaign, etc. So you know fully well, if this party wins, this is the type of mandates that will be coming. If that party wins, that's a type of mandate. So in managing those political risks, because remember, as I said before, you are going to have that political side of it, be it you're a political appointee or a politically exposed person. So yes, I would want to say to management, if it is that they can stall for time, and also to, when the new minister comes in, at least seek to have a conversation. And that is why most of them line ministers will seek to have meetings with the board and with the chief executive officer, the permanent sec, within that first two weeks or so. You see, so you do have some measures that manage those types of risk. But Mohini, that's an
Thank you
excellent
very much.
question.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tanisha, I want to come to you so you could share what happens in that transition period, but I also want you to answer Lauren Sandiford's question. In the chat, Lauren asked for the context there in Jamaica. What was the major driver or drivers for the implementation of legislation to address these issues?
Okay. All right, no problem. So in addressing Mohini's question, we always need to remember that the board is the head of the state-owned entity. It is the head. In Jamaica, we tell them the board is the head of the public body. The CEO, or by whatever nomenclature, is the head of operations, but the board drives the strategic direction of the company. And so therefore, with a change of government, it doesn't mean that the mandate of the organization will change. It doesn't mean that the strategy will definitely change. Of course, some changes will happen, but if it is that you are given a directive by the board, I can't see, unless it is something that is so major that will bind the company, for management to tell board that they're not doing it. The board, through the CEO, must say, I will not do that. Unless it is a situation that is so grave that you think that in the future it will come back to haunt the company, then at that point you may take a decision to say, no, let us think about this. But of course, when a board resigns, remember that the resignation is not effected until it is accepted. So you resigning doesn't mean you no longer possess that fiduciary duty. Until it is accepted by the minister, you should continue to do what is expected of you. And so the board is expected to act until the minister accepts that resignation. And so management should not rebel to say, I will not do this. Right? So you have to come to some sort of commonality where that is concerned, have a conversation, have an understanding of where the board is and how management feels. But you can't really outrightly say, no, we're not doing this. That may cost you your job, even though you're going through a transition.
Yes. And that is nicely to the next question then, Tanisha, because these things do happen. So therefore, what was it that led to this legislation in Jamaica?
Oh, wow. So many things, so many things. There was a whole lot of political loyalty, and affiliations and individuals being sent to boards to drive the will of the political directorate, rather than doing what is supposed to be done for the good of the organization. And we saw that, especially at the board level, there was a lot of tug and war, a lot of push and pull, where these persons are loyal to the political directorate, and they will not do anything outside of the will of the political directorate. We found that there were a lot of individuals who were joined to the board who did not have the competencies at all to sit on those boards. And so it stymied a lot of the processes, the growth of the organizations. And so if you have individuals who merely have a few CXCs, they don't have degrees, but they have, they have certain possessions, right? And so these are the persons who are joined to these boards to lead and to actually help achieve the national goals. It's really not possible. And so when we looked at all of those things, we made a decision to do something about it. We're saying to the political directorate, it is totally fine to select your friend to a board, but ensure that your friend is competent. Ensure that your friend has the skills and the knowledge and the education that is required to sit on this board. That's really why.
Thanks so much, Tanisha. I want to encourage persons who are interested in this area. Jamaica is such a shining example for us, and there are a lot of lessons one can learn. So I want to encourage persons to get a book called Footprints in the Sand. It was written by Nigel Clark, the former Minister of Finance in Jamaica, where he captures a lot of what led to Jamaica's stability and its transformation to where it is now, because Jamaica has been through a tremendous change. But I see our chairman is here with us and he has raised his hand. So we are very happy to welcome him in and allow him to make a contribution. Nigel, thank you so much for joining us, and we are happy to give you the floor now.
Thank you very much, Kamla. Very interesting discussion. I want to go back to ISO 37000 and purpose. So for me, a lot of what we are discussing here can be sorted out if we are very clear about the purpose of the organization. Why was this organization formed? Who does it serve? And in the transition, it is critical for me that the incumbent board takes the time to lay out very clearly what their current priorities are in achieving the organization's purpose. So an organization's purpose doesn't change. How one achieves that purpose changes. And it is incumbent, it is important that the incumbent board takes the time to articulate what their strategy is, what their priorities are, and what they expect to achieve from implementing those strategies. And that should be presented to the minister, to the ministry, whoever is taking over. Now, I'm not saying that the incoming administration must follow, but for me, it is important that I take the time to explain, to articulate, so that they understand how we were going about achieving the organization's purpose. And I want to go back to what Claire said, and Ronnie opined on it. You resign, but you offer your resignation. You don't resign, you offer your resignation. And as soon as the minister accepts it, then you resign. You sign that letter, but you don't resign with an undated letter. You offer your resignation, knowing that the minister, the incoming government has the mandate to choose whoever they will. And in that offer, you also offer to meet and discuss and explain what you have done, what you have been doing, what your current priorities are, what your current challenges are, and how you are going about dealing with those challenges. That's for me, is the critical thing to do. That's the professional thing to do. All right. Whether you are political, whether you are professional, that is the way you go about the transition. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nigel. And I really like this point you made, right? Which is that the purpose of the organization can actually be achieved in different ways. So it may be that there's a difference in the mandate of the new government, but it doesn't always change the purpose of the organization itself, and therefore how instructions are carried out. Now, there was a question for Claire in the chat, and it's from another Nigel that we have here with us. It's Nigel Chinapu. Nigel, I want to say, I'm not sure if I got the question fully. I'm going to read it, but I'm going to also ask you to unmute to clarify what the question is for Claire to answer, because the question for Claire was, some Trinidad entities that are created under Companies Act with operating functions like electricity generation with external lenders and international agreements that create commercial risk and does not allow the requested hold your hand approach. The question, Nigel, is what exactly did you want to elaborate on? Go ahead.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity. So, you know, and it's not unique to Trinidad, even though there was mention of Trinidad. So there is a distinction, I think, and I think many parties have spoken to it before, but I just wanted to be specific to a couple of the comments made and directed it at Claire only because she was the last one who alluded to it, but some others did as well. But there are entities who, and this was specific to activities leading up to election, where a number of parties were saying, no, you know, you're leading up to election, absolutely stop. I mean, we could understand that for some services or roadworks, etc. But there are entities that are fully government-owned that have commercial agreements. I mean, they didn't plan when the election was going to happen. They may have signed that contract a year ago. So it was just to raise it, even though we were being definitive in a lot of the statements, that there are areas that are worthy of consideration and can be a lot grayer. And some of the management entities that we've spoken about, who some may or may not you know, be wanting to follow instructions, etc. Some of them independent of instructions from these boards, whether they resigned, whether they offered to resign, on all the 19 permutations. Irrespective of those, some of these entities have these commercial agreements to follow, because nobody's going to come afterwards and exonerate them for breaching these legal agreements or the consequences of it, especially the new administration. And no one from the old administration, I would wager, would stand up and say, no, they're supposed to do that. So we skirted around it, but I just wanted to be frontal with some of those examples to get the committee's views. Again, I picked on Claire because I know her and she was the last one who spoke about it. But really, it was an open question as well to hear, to be a little more specific for those of us who have those situations.
As they would say, business is business. And the board and management must understand that. Those contracts must be complied with. Your business operations must continue. So you cannot abdicate any of your responsibilities from that perspective. All we're saying here is, during that period, you're looking at, do you have proper justification to make a decision that will continue to bind the organization? If you have an agreement, yes, you cannot not do it. So again, look at what are the requirements of the organization. What is it that you must meet and you must do to meet that mandate? And that is your fiduciary duties. So as we said before, every time that you make a decision not to continue or to discontinue any of your activities, etc., then you have to determine, is it that you're abdicating your responsibilities? What are the grounds that's causing me now to not make that decision going forward, to disrupt the organization in its operations, to cause the organization to fail to comply or to fulfill its contractual obligations? Yes, and you have to make sure you minute that, because at the end of the day, if you fail to meet your contractual obligations, you are going to just be same grossly negligent as if it is that you went ahead and buying the organization is something that that is not in the best interest of the organization.
Okay.
Yeah, and also to be very wary of, as we said before, during that transition period, what is the authority or the power that is bestowed upon you? Because if it is continued power, then it means you continue your business. If it is subject to, the caveat is there, which appears to be with Jamaica. There are caveats. It means those matters will have to roll up to the minister who appointed you. So be it corporation sole, in your case, Nigel, that it will have to be rolled up. You may seek to have meetings, and communication is very important. Now, I want to go back to what Nigel Romano said, and I think a lot of us are looking around the off-air resignation. Yes, Nigel, and the undated resignation. I think the fundamental principle between all of us, be it Ronnie, Nigel, and I, is that you leave the date up to the minister. You don't put in, I am resigning effective tomorrow, and then just tender that resignation. And even if you offer that resignation with that resignation date, what are you leaving to the discretion of the minister? So you want to make sure that the fundamental principle that Ronnie, Nigel, and I are stating here is really and truly making sure that you don't abandon your post. You see, you don't want to walk away from your duties until it is that you have a date that the minister has accepted. So if it is that he's accepting your resignation that's offered, and your resignation date is the date of his acceptance, then he has to tell you what acceptance means. Acceptance to him does not mean to say, I have received your resignation. It means to say, I am accepting your resignation as of whichever date it is. And if it's a future date, he needs to communicate that to you. And within a very quick period of time, you see, because otherwise, I think someone in the chat alluded to the level of uncertainties when it is that you don't know the date. Yes.
Thank you so much. We're just 5 minutes. In fact, we're just 3 minutes away from closing time. And I do want you to address that. I was going to bring it to you, but I want to start with closing comments, and I want to start with Tanisha. I know it will take you a short while, but be as brief as you can. Tanisha, I want you to address this question from Trisha Suzanne Chin, where she spoke about what is the difference of treatment for the appointment of boards in the publicly traded entities. That should there be some risk-based approach to appointments to ensure continuity during an administration change? So is there a difference in Jamaica when it comes to the state organizations that are publicly listed? So your closing comments and your wrap up to that. Claire, I will go next to you. And that would have been the question from Ria in terms of what is in the mind of directors who have submitted their resignation, and therefore, what is your mindset like when you know you can be removed at any moment? And then we'll end off with Robbie giving his closing remarks, right? So Tanisha, can we go to you, please?
Okay, we do currently in Jamaica, we do not have any government-owned entity that's publicly listed.
Wait. Hang on a second. While I was there, I learned about the National Transport. They're listed on the Social Stock Exchange.
Oh,
I think.
the
Right.
socials.
So,
right.
Okay, but you have no state enterprises that are also listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange? All right.
Not on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. We had a wind farm that was listed, but then that went private.
Okay. Okay.
So
All right.
it's no longer considered to be a publicly owned enterprise.
Okay.
But the treatment, it remains the same. All the public bodies, the boards are appointed by the minister versus what happens in the private sector where the shareholders make decisions in respect of the boards. We don't have that in government because the government is the major shareholder for all of these companies. And of course, they make decisions in respect of the boards that are appointed in the public sector. And I'm not sure if I answered the question because there is really none that is
Trinidad and Tobago, but go ahead with your closing. What would you like to leave us with, Tanisha?
I just like to say that we just have to ensure that we understand that everything that we do, especially as a public servants, that it's in the best interest of the nation. Of course, we are affiliated to different parties, etc. While the party has a mandate, right, it should redound to the good of the country. And so while we're upholding some of the principles of the party, we must ensure that whatever we do is in the best interest of our country and service to our nation.
Thank you very much, Tanisha. I appreciate that, and I echo that sentiment. Claire, as I come to you for closing remarks, I would share with our participants that First Citizens Bank being one of the listed companies in the stock exchange, we have seen government change the entire board already, right? So whatever risk management approach that the government would have taken to ensure that there's continuity, it doesn't change the fact that as the government, you have the right of appointment to boards. So therefore,
But Kamla, you have to wait for the AGM. You cannot just do it with outside the AGM. It's the same with national flower mills.
okay, great, thank you. And there we have an example from someone who has done a publicly listed state enterprise. Appreciate that guidance, Nigel. Yes, Claire. So what's in the mind of directors during this transition period when you know your resignation can be accepted at any time?
Okay. And you live your life as a director on that basis. I have received a notice an hour before I was replaced. Yes, before it went public, and that's okay. Your appointer has the right to terminate at any point in time. Yes, and as such, you have the right to resign at any point in time. So I think we need to understand that. Where it is now, it's an external event that has occurred that is leading you to make this decision. Then, of course, you have to wait. You have to wait. When you are tendering that resignation, what is the most important factor in your mind? If it is, and I think one of the directors, that would be Stuart Young's father, right? He resigned because he's so politically exposed and so politically affiliated that in his mind, he's prepared to resign with immediate effect. Yeah, and one has to appreciate that. There are other directors now who you have to think of, okay, on that board, you might have one or two such minded persons, and that is all right. However, at least the majority of the board should consider how do we continue with this organization and not be seen as abandoning your post. So again, Ronnie, Nigel, and I, the fundamental principles appear to be the same, be it that we call it undated, be that we say offer your resignation at the, what's the word? At the behest of the line minister, and he will so state that effective date of your resignation. Yes, but you must be prepared. That effective date could be tomorrow, whatever it is. But once it is that you're in that position, meetings are being called, you have board papers to address, you continue as usual. If you drop dead before your tenure, before he accepts it, anyhow it taken, you would have served to the best of your ability and your conscience until that last moment.
Thanks,
yes?
Claire. So I want to remind persons that the survey has been put in the chat for us to get your feedback on today's panel discussion, please. Robbie, as we come to you for your 2 minutes close, I wanted to remind us of the situation where it is that it's not really clear for us in Trinidad and Tobago. We need to know, what is the process of this appointment? Is it the line minister who seeks persons? Is it cabinet? Is it, can you share with us, if in your knowledge, what is that process in Guyana like? And your closing remarks for us as we look at transitioning of state boards under new governments.
In Guyana, it's the line ministers that makes the recommendation to cabinet. Once cabinet's approved, then it's gazetted, and that's your board.
So essentially, the appointment is through cabinet.
Yes, and there has been times in transition where an entire board, I can't recall where people have resigned here after a change of government. But I know that there were boards that were dissolved after a change of government, and there were boards that were left to continue until they expired and the board were changed, or some members were changed. But if we could live in a perfect world, for me, it would be that change of government does not require the change of board.
Yeah.
And that would have been the ultimate goal. And if I have to check back on the Curacao model, what happens after a change of government, if the board resigns or what happens.
Because they're not appointed by government, they're appointed by an independent entity, and therefore there's no change when there's a change in government.
Exactly. Well, that should be the real model.
Yeah,
that should be the real model. And you know, even though Jamaica has done so much in advancing it, as Tanisha said, it doesn't prevent them from appointing their friends and foes or their comrades, and that's not what it should be. Then it simply means we are manipulating the process. All right. So for me, in select, it's I have seen here permanent secretary changes when government changes, and the operative word permanent. It's really for that continuity. All right, and you see those changes, and similarly with boards. I don't believe that they should change. The government mandate may change, the directive may change, but they can instruct that policy through the subject minister to the board. And then if the board fails to comply, then you have no other choice than to dissolve the board. The power is in your hand. But the fact I don't subscribe that board should be changed when government changes. Because if we have a system that is foolproof, that is transparent in the selection of our members, then we will have people who are independent, who are professionals, and who are competent. And in Tanisha's comments that you can put people on board, but they are qualified, as to someone who is unqualified to sit on a board. But I have sit on board and see qualified people have made more bad judgments than unqualified people. And I have always said that I have learned more outside a classroom than in any classroom that I sit in. So the fact remains that you have to put a framework, structure, and legislations in place that, and as Kamla said, guide me there. Maybe the Curacao model is the near to perfect model that all of us should adopt. So there are continuity.
Yeah. Thank you, Robbie. So what we are looking at really is that persons can have political affiliation, but they can be independently minded. And within our small societies, where it is that you do have persons who have their political affiliations, but you want persons who will have that competence, who will bring that ethics to bear when they serve in organizations to ensure it is in the best interest of the organization and the country. So thank you all so much. We have gone over time here with our panel discussion on transition of state boards under new government administration. It's been a robust discussion. It's been a great discussion. We have learned so much. So thank you so much, Tanisha Campbell, joining us from Jamaica, Claire Gomez-Miller, joining us from Trinidad and Tobago, and Robbie Ramaran from Guyana. Sharing their points of view, enlightening us onto many of the issues that we need to consider. Because when we look at state boards and the impact they have on national development, it's tremendous. And therefore, we all need to have a say in helping this move in a way that is acceptable to all. Thank you all so much. I remind you again, click on that link, give us your formal feedback so we can capture this. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you all for another CCGI session. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.